What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron. Kory, what's up?
I'm feeling some magic tonight, Nick. I'm feeling some magic.
There's our corny pun for the show. We continue our preview series, and we're talking Orlando Magic today. Before we get into it, quick reminder, you can find the NBA Outlet on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube. Also head to DesignTree/OffTheGlass. Use discount code OTG5 to save yourself $5 and grab some OTG merch. But before we talk next season, we'll look back at last year, which was an impressive season for the Magic. 42-40, 7th in the Eastern Conference, lost in 5 games to the Raptors. How would you summarize last year in one emoji?
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
I think it was a good year for the Magic, obviously, making the playoffs, stealing game 1. I know that you, me, and Jack Mannion were all together watching some of the first round action, and we saw Toronto pull up the upset. We saw Orlando pull up the upset in Toronto. We were like, wow, like is this going to be like a really competitive series? And it obviously ended a little bit quicker shortly after that. But this Magic team definitely took strides in the right direction. You saw Aaron Gordon really become a perimeter threat defensively, upping his offense. Jonathan Isaac obviously showed some growth. Nikola Vucevic becoming an all-star and showing that he's one of the better centers in this league. It was a really good year of progression. Steve Clifford has really turned this Orlando Magic team into one of the top-notch defensive teams in the NBA.
Yeah, I just went with a surprise face, kind of for what you said. I mean, going to the year, there was some thoughts, hey, maybe Orlando could compete for a playoff spot. No one thought they realistically would grab it, especially in February. They had a stretch where they lost a couple games. They were out of the race, but they really picked things up in that post-All-Star break. And you mentioned the defense was very, very good. But what was your biggest positive takeaway from last year?
Biggest positive takeaway would be the young guys. And I don't really want to pinpoint one, but I mean, between Aaron Gordon and Jonathan Isaac, both of these guys have just shown to be cornerstone pieces going forward. We kind of forget Aaron Gordon is only going to be 24 this upcoming year. I feel like we have kind of written him off as maybe not being a well-rounded player, but was able to shoot 44% from the field, 34% from 3, averaged 16 points per game, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, had more ball handling duties probably than you would like from Aaron Gordon last year, but shows that he's actually a decent playmaker. And then defensively, he was one of the better defenders on Kawhi Leonard in that first round playoff matchup, which says something because we know how good Kawhi is. And then Jonathan Isaac, it's really about size with him. He got a great wingspan, great length. But the Orlando Magic now have 2 cornerstone pieces moving forward.
Yeah, you saw a lot of flashes from Isaac last year, and then post All-Star break, he really turned it up. And the most impressive thing was, I think he shot 38% from 3 post All-Star break compared to pre-All-Star break, he shot under 30%. So if he can knock down that 3 ball, it makes it a little bit easier to play Gordon and Isaac together. And you mentioned defensively, this can be a really good duo because you have Isaac with the length and then Gordon with the athleticism and the strength. And I think that's one reason he had some success against Kawhi is because he's one of the stronger wings in the league, where a lot of guys get bullied by Kawhi. That wasn't the case for him. But I just went with Nikola Vucevic having a career year and then Orlando making the playoffs. Like, I think that's really important for the franchise. This is a team that I believe hasn't made the playoffs since Dwight Howard was in town. So to kind of turn around the culture and the perspective of the team was very important doing that.
Definitely.
Now, biggest negative takeaway.
So there's 2 of this for me. One would be that you got Markelle Fultz, but you still didn't get to see Markelle Fultz last season. So maybe that's a little bit of a nitpick. But the other negative would be offense is at times an issue for the Orlando Magic. They were 24th in the league, scoring just 107 points per game. They really leaned heavily on their defensive end of the court. But this team kind of lacks playmaking. It kind of lacks a go-to scorer, especially in crunch time. It's a by-committee team. So for me, it was just the lack of offensive punch and of the lack of seeing Markelle Fultz. But of course, it looks like we're going to see a lot of Fultz this upcoming year.
Yeah, I agree. I think the offense just needs to catch up to the defense. Last year, at times, it was a real struggle. Not having any elite offensive players, somebody were like, okay, this is my go-to scorer. You know, Vucevic had a really good year, but it's sometimes tough to have your center be your go-to scorer in 2 minutes of the game. So I think if they can get that offense improved this year, it would be really big. But let's talk Markelle Fultz before we get into the ranking a little bit. What are your expectations for him in Orlando? And do you think that was a smart move by them to make a trade for him last year?
I think it's a smart move for them because first off, before I get into where I think Markelle Fultz will be, I think it was a smart move because if you're the Orlando Magic, this is not a free agent destination. We know this. It's tough to get guys to go to these smaller markets. And your starting point guard is DJ Augustine. No shade of DJ Augustine. The guy played extremely well last year, had a career year without a doubt. But this isn't a guy going forward you want to be a cornerstone point guard going forward. Markelle Fultz can still be a franchise defining player. He can still be arguably a number one option on a team once he reaches his peak, if he stays healthy and etc. So I think taking the risk on Markelle Fultz, why not? I think it was, you're getting a first round pick, a top, what was he picked overall? First overall?
First overall.
Right. So it's a first overall pick that you're getting with, little to no expectations, because we didn't know what to expect. We don't still know what to really expect from him. But I think it was a risk you had to take if you're the Orlando Magic. And then as Fultz the person, I've liked what I've seen so far in preseason. He can get out in transition. The jump shot looks better. He looks a little bit more confident out there. I'm not expecting him to light the world on fire, but I think him averaging somewhere between 13 to 15 points per game with, 6 to 7 assists doesn't seem unlikely with, a handful of rebounds. I think this is a very dynamic point guard.
Yeah, I agree. I think you look at it and it's a great opportunity for Fultz and Orlando to kind of get their point guard of the future. Like you mentioned, this is a former number one overall pick. The talent is still there. He had some weird injuries and whatever you want to call it with the shooting issues. Maybe in Orlando with less pressure, less media, he can find his groove. And it was a smart move by Orlando, kind of taking advantage of Philadelphia's timeline. Most teams wouldn't trade a number one overall pick like that, but due to where Philly's at in terms of competing for a title, hey, we don't really need young pieces. We need to bring in other talent. So they capitalize on that, and hopefully things work out for Markelle Fultz.
And to keep in mind, Fultz will just be 21 years old. The kid can't even drink yet still. So this is a guy who's got so much potential and so much time still to become that guy.
Exactly. There's plenty of time for him to find his game. Maybe he doesn't even necessarily live up to the hype of the number one overall pick, but long as he can still be a solid starter or a solid point guard, that's what Orlando needs. But moving on to next year, in terms of OTG power rankings, the Magic are coming in at number 20. Do you think this is fair, too high, or too low?
I think it's original. Okay, so hearing 20, I think too low. But I think it's fair because again, our power rankings have a lot of Western Conference teams at the top of this list. So the Eastern Conference teams kind of fall down. I still think this keeps the Magic around a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. So I think it's a little low even still, but it's probably fair because there's a lot of Western Conference teams above them, and the East is obviously weaker than the West.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you hear 20, you're like, oh, that's too low for a possible playoff team. But when you look at the competition in the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference teams in front of them, I mean, there's an argument to be made that maybe they're better than the Pistons. You can maybe even argue they're better than the Heat because we know what to expect a little bit from Orlando, or these other teams, they're expected to make a jump. So I think a Magic fan might say this is too low, but I think right now 20 is fine. I think they also could jump, though. I think there's potential for some of these young pieces to improve. I mentioned earlier Isaac picking up post All-Star break. If he were to take another jump, and if they were to get something from Mo Bamba, then who knows how high they could go.
Definitely.
Now, moving on to the offseason, no new coach or GM, but they did have a draft pick, and the draft pick will not play this year. I'm going to do my best on his name, Chuma Okeke, and he was 16th overall, and he tore his ACL in March Madness, so he won't play pretty much this entire season. I believe it's a redshirt year, and they actually worked his contract out pretty cleverly, where he didn't get an actual NBA contract. I think it was like a G League contract for this year, and then the following season, he'll get his actual contract.
Interesting. Hopefully he gets back soon.
Yeah, so obviously, and he was really balling out in March Madness, and he was a guy going kind of up lottery boards, and to get him at 16, there's some real potential there. But going to the offseason, not very busy. The only free agent signing is Aminu. Thoughts on that?
Aminu, big fan, follows me on Twitter. Thank you, Aminu. But this is a guy. Yeah, not, but this is a guy who does the little things. Was a very good player out in Portland. He actually caught my eye his 1 year in Dallas. He just does a little bit of the small things. A guy who has developed a three-point shot in his latter part of his NBA career, entering the prime are going to be probably 29 years old next year. Shot 43, 34 last year. A decent rebounder, a really good defender. A kind of a weird fix because there's quite a few power forwards on this Orlando Magic roster, but a very good vet to have on the roster. I don't hate the signing for some depth purposes, but it was slightly weird to go after another guy, which you kind of have, Gordon, Isaac, Bamba, Vucevic, all these bigger guys on the roster. You didn't necessarily need another power forward.
Especially on a 3-year deal. I think that's the interesting thing. Around 10 million. I think it's like 9.2 to start out. Having him there with the other pieces kind of taking minutes away. And if anything, the NBA is going small. It looks like Orlando's trying to stay lanky and have him, there. It's going to be interesting how Steve Clifford deals with this rotation because you have guys like we mentioned, Gordon and Isaac, possibly being two young stars for your franchise. You want to give those guys big minutes, and Amino really can't play with those two.
Yeah, no, it's maybe the trade bait. I mean, it's a friendly contract, right? It's like $9 million a year. So I think we could see Aminu possibly getting flipped. But again, I don't feel like you don't sign Aminu with the intention of trading him. That's not a player which you're like, oh, we got to sign Aminu in order to flip him. Like that's just not a mindset of I think of a team signing a guy like Aminu. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they use him going forward.
Yeah, I agree. It's like trade baiting especially for a team like Orlando that doesn't sign a lot of free agents. You think they probably would have been better off using that $9 million on a point guard or some type of guard, unless they just have really high expectations for Fultz going to the year.
Or if they want to go big. I mean, we did see, Philadelphia is going a little bit bigger. I think Aminu can play small forward, so there could be just some lineups in which he's playing the wing position. But again, this team has enough wings and bigs.
Yeah, and maybe they're going to look to play, Gordon or Isaac a little bit at small ball center or something like that, and then roll all three of them out at the same time. Who knows? Obviously, you mentioned it. Some teams are going big, so maybe they're trying to counter that. But players out, Timothy Mozgov, Jerry and Grant. Any thoughts on these two being out of here?
No, Mozgov, so long. It's been a fun ride. I still remember you getting the big time money from the Lakers on free agency a couple of years ago.
At midnight, too.
Yeah, at midnight, one of the first deals that we saw. And Jerry and Grant, he's tried a couple different places now, just hasn't been able to get it together. I'm not sure if we see him again in the league, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think he might have to work his way back into the league. If there was an opportunity to get good point guard minutes, it would have been in Orlando. Michael Carter-Williams ended up getting signed in the season and kind of taking that backup point guard role.
Says a lot.
And yeah, exactly. No disrespect to Michael Carter-Williams, who turned into a solid NBA player. He's just nothing special. Jerry and Grant, you need to work on your game a little bit more. But talking about Orlando as a team next season, what's the biggest X factor?
I think the biggest X factor is going to be offense. We kind of alluded to this when we talked about some of the negatives. This is a team that is very good defensively. They were one of the best defensive teams. They were 8th in defensive rating. They were only 22nd in offensive rating. The mantra goes defense wins championships, but again, your defense can only carry you so far. You have to score points, and obviously, don't get my words twisted. I'm not saying the Magic are competing for a title by any means, but you have to be able to score points. And this team, as we both alluded to, they still don't have that number one guy. Does it become Aaron Gordon this year? Maybe. Do they still rely on Vucevic heavily? Probably. Does Isaac step up a little bit? Does Markelle Fultz become a guy you can rely on for scoring? Does Fournier keep up his three-point shooting? Does Terrence Ross continue to light it up from deep? He had over 200 threes made last year off the bench. For me, it's the offense. This team needs to generate points to match their defense. Even though the Eastern Conference is weaker, there are a lot of these teams, the Heat, Pistons, the Magic. You could even make a slight case for the Hawks possibly. Maybe even the Bulls have some steam right now on competing for those lower end seeds. So it won't be as easy as last year to make the playoffs, I think. So you're going to have to be able to score some more points.
Yeah, I think if the offense can catch up, that's the X factor right there. There's just a lot of different possibilities where it could happen. You mentioned Eric Gordon, you mentioned Isaac Fultz, and even though Vucevic is a really good scorer, we kind of hinted at this earlier. It's tough for your number one scorer to be a post player. Sometimes it's hard to get him the ball. I know he can work a little bit from the elbow at times, but it's easier if you have a guard or a wing that can go get you a bucket with 50 seconds remaining, down by 2 or whatever it may be. So someone needs to step up in that area of playmaking on the perimeter. Now, starting lineup on opening night.
So I think the starting lineup, I don't know that. Though this is a question for I asked you. Do you think Fultz is good to go by the start of the season, right?
Yeah, he's good to go. Good to go. Good to. It's not Halloween yet. But spooky season out here. He's good to go, but reports are that I don't think he's going to start. I
Right.
think Augustine's going to start from at
So
least what I've seen.
So I have Fultz as my bubble guy because I think preferably I would want to see Fultz start, but I understand that you don't want to just let the training wheels off right away after what we've seen him go through the last couple of years. So with that said, it's DJ Augustine, it's Evan Fournier, it's Jonathan Isaac, it's Aaron Gordon, and it's Nikola Vucevic.
Yep, same thing over here. I think another reason you probably elect to not go with Fultz is that his lack of 3-point shot. DJ Augustine was probably one of the better 3-point shooters on this team last year, so you want to keep that spacing. And obviously, the biggest issue with Fultz over the last year has been, can he shoot a jump shot? Can he shoot a free throw? Right now, we don't really know.
Right.
So starting lineup, I mean, obviously, Terrence Ross maybe could squeeze in there. Fournier was really bad, but he's very good in his 6-man role. I guess before we get to player to watch, what did you think about Orlando kind of going all in on the core they had last year? Re-signing Vucevic, re-signing Terrence Ross, and kind of keeping this group together.
I'm cool with it. The Vucevic thing is interesting, and they actually didn't get him like a terrible contract. I think
it's declining too, which is a very clever thing by Orlando, who also did that with Aaron Gordon.
Right. So now having the control of Vucevic and the possibility if you need to move him in the future, it makes him more likely, as you mentioned, declining. He's making 28 this year and then 26, and by the last year of his deal, only 22 million a year. So I think getting Vucevic on a somewhat friendly deal in that fashion is good. But you need to retain your quote unquote best player, even though I don't think he'll be the best player at the end of this season. Vucevic was your best player, and you can't really afford to lose a guy like Vucevic until you can maybe truly trust Mo Bamba to be that center of the future, which Mo Bamba really didn't get a lot of opportunity to show that last year. So you had to bring back Vucevic, and then Terrence Ross, probably a slight overpay, but it was a guy who was instant offense off the bench, 38% from three. You need that kind of firepower. As we mentioned, this team kind of lacks offense. Not ideal that Terrence Ross is probably your second or third best offensive player, but you can't afford to lose that kind of 3-point shooting.
Especially if you didn't think you were going to bring anybody else in. I think what this signaled to me is that, hey, we want to kind of change the perspective. We want to change the culture in Orlando and get back to making the playoffs in consecutive years and kind of set the tone. It would have been easy for them not to re-sign these guys and just keep the young talent they have, but they probably wouldn't make the postseason this year or compete for the postseason. So that's kind of what it signaled to me. And also, you pretty much had to keep these two after not trading them at the deadline. Like if you knew that you weren't going to re-sign them, then you probably should have moved them in February where there's a lot of talk around them.
Oh, definitely. Especially a guy like Vucevic who made an all-star team. If you were going to trade him, it had to be around the deadline. If you lost him for nothing, it would have been a major. I mean, we'd be not laughing at them, but it'd be like the Charlotte Hornets because they would have overpaid for someone likely similar to the Terrence Rozier level, Terry Rozier level of an overpay when you lose an all-star for nothing.
Exactly. But who's your player to watch for Orlando this year?
Man, there's so many guys to pick, right? I mean, that's the one fun thing about a young team like this. And I'm going to go with Aaron Gordon, a guy who caught my eye probably the most of anyone last season, especially in that first round matchup against the Raptors. I mean, I always knew he was a high flying dunker. And that's probably what majority of NBA fans know him as, the guy from the dunk contest. But there's so much more to his game at just 23. The fact that he can defend a high-level superstar in Kawhi Leonard and not get destroyed on possessions. The fact that he can use his body skillfully with being, like a somewhere between a Blake Griffin and some sort of wing, if you want to, whatever wing you want to pick, really. And the fact that he's developed a 3-point shot. Can his offense continue to grow? Can he develop more of an off the dribble shot, perhaps? We saw him as more of a playmaker last year a little bit. So for me, can Aaron Gordon become the clear-cut number 2 option, or can he even push his way to being the quote-unquote best player of this Orlando Magic team?
Yeah, obviously, like you said, there's a lot of players to pick. Gordon's a great pick. And last year was really a year where he showed a lot. He showed a lot of flashes of potentially being that all-star type player, just getting a little bit more consistent and polishing that game a little bit more offensively, tightening up the handles, becoming more consistent with his jump shot, especially his 3-point shot, where it seems like times he'll have hot and cold stretches where one month he'll be shooting like above 40%, the next month he'll be shooting under 30%. So we can get more consistency and polish his game a little bit more. I think he can really take that next step and maybe even possibly be an all-star this season or at least be up for consideration. But for me, I'm going to go with Markelle Fultz. We mentioned it, former number one overall pick, still a lot of talent there. Can he shoot? If he can shoot, we've seen some of the other skills already, and they look very good. So if he can kind of get his game to another level, then all of a sudden Orlando's in a really good position. They have possibly their point guard of the future, and maybe they make a move to add another player because they feel confident in what they have with Fultz. So, but it easily could have gone with Isaac here, who's a guy who really impressed me, like I mentioned earlier, in post All-Star break. If he can add a little bit more to his offensive game, we already know defensively he's a problem with that length.
I would also say honorable mention to Mo Bamba. Mo Bamba. Obviously, Mo Bamba, there's a song made after him that I think a lot of people know, probably more than they know him actually as a basketball player. And this was a guy that a lot of Orlando Magic fans were extremely excited about. Steve Clifford doesn't necessarily love to run with a lot of young guys. And Mo Bamba just looked a little bit unseasoned, especially at times last season. Bamba becoming the backup center and maybe even showing flashes of being the center of the future would just be another step in the right direction for this young team.
You're right. We didn't really see a lot of Bamba, and like you said, he wasn't necessarily ready to be on an NBA court, and he wasn't strong enough to battle with NBA centers. He was kind of getting pushed around down there. If he can be the backup center, that'd be a huge jump for him this season because he would be a scoring option for that second unit because his skill set is very good. Obviously, not polished yet, but the potential for him to be a very good center, we're talking like a top 10 center if he were to ever hit his ceiling, it's there.
Definitely. And again, the backup center position is up for grabs. I think it's between him or Kem Birch.
And Birch played well from them last year.
Yes, he did play well. But again, I don't know what Birch's ceiling is. Birch is obviously also going to be 27. Not that age necessarily matters, but your development obviously being 20 for Bamba and 26 for Birch, there's a lot more chance for Bamba to grow. Whereas Birch, you might be getting what you see.
Yeah, he's a backup center. He knows his role. He does it. Obviously, Bamba can provide you a different element to the team, not just the second unit. But the overall season for Orlando, what would you say is worst case scenario?
I think worst case scenario would be missing the playoffs,
Yep.
which seems somewhat possible with how many teams we have competing in the Eastern Conference for these bottom playoff seeds. So I think worst case scenario would be them missing the playoffs, and maybe I don't even want to put it into the atmosphere, into the air, but we don't see Fultz healthy all year. I think that would be a major disappointment and a worst case scenario as well.
Yeah, I agree. If Fultz were to have a really bad season and continue to struggle and just not necessarily be a physical thing, but almost a mental thing where he just can't get his jump shot right, that would really suck, not only for the Magic, but for him personally. But I agree. I think worst case would be no playoffs and just not progression from not only Fultz, but Aaron Gordon kind of plateauing, Jonathan Isaac just being what he is right now, and then Vucevic's and Augustine's career years were career years last year, and they kind of get closer to the mean this season.
Yeah.
Now, best case scenario.
Best case scenario would be probably what every Orlando Magic fan is hoping for, and I think that's a 4 seed. I think best case scenario is getting home court advantage, and that happens when literally everything goes right. Aaron Gordon takes the leap. Isaac gets a little bit stronger. I know Isaac put on 25 pounds. And we've mentioned in the past on this show how he needs to get a little bit bigger. He's a little bit of a smaller guy at 6'10", weight-wise, obviously not length. So seeing those young guys take a jump, we see Markelle Fultz maybe even in the conversation for most improved player of the year, healthy, and this Orlando Magic team finds offense to match their defense. Because I do think there's enough young talent here where if these guys all pop off at the right time, the Magic are going to be in a really good position.
Yeah, I have best case. I don't know. I just can't see them getting to the 4th seed. I think it's possible, but my best case is 5th. And I think there's a lot of improvement from Gordon, Isaac, and then we see something from Bamba. And then maybe they even get to the second round with the right matchup. If you're getting that 5th seed, you're matching up with a 4th seed, and obviously you earned it. And it's not like the top of the East, other than Milwaukee and Philadelphia, is super stacked, and none of those teams have flaws. So there's a possibility for Orlando maybe getting in the second round in a best case scenario. But what's your actual prediction? Where do they finish in the division?
So I have them finishing with 44 wins. And now I also realized this today when I was looking at the Orlando Magic. I have 3 teams finishing with 44 wins. So that's somewhat problematic, but they're finishing 3rd in their division. No, excuse me, 2nd in their division behind the Miami Heat. Because I don't know necessarily between the Pistons, Heat, and Magic who make the playoffs. And I know already I said the Pistons and Heat are going to make the playoffs on the preview series. So that means by default, I have to say the Magic missed the playoffs. but I feel like that could easily change when the minute the season starts. But I have them finishing second in the division and missing the playoffs.
Yeah, I have them second in division, and I also was in the same predicament as you because I did predict the Pistons and Heat to make the playoffs. But I think there's also an argument to say that Orlando is what we know the best right now. The Pistons made a couple changes. Blake Griffin's health is such a question mark, and then with Miami, Jimmy Butler's coming in. They moved a couple pieces around. Are these young guys going to improve? It's like Orlando is kind of the consistent team. I have them at 43 wins, just behind the Heat and the Pistons, but would I be surprised they made the playoffs? No, not at all. I expect it to be pretty much a three-team race for those last two spots.
Yeah, I think our biggest, I mean, at least for me, my biggest not even concern is teams in the East got better. I'm not so sure the Magic did yet until we see these young guys play.
And to say this too is where Gordon, Isaac, and Fultz, who knows, they all might be better, but I'm not willing to bet that Vucevic and Augustine have the same season they had last year.
Well, that's true. I mean, Augustine shooting 42 or 43% from three feels like a really big outlier.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a good player, but he's probably, no disrespect to him, I don't think he's a starting level point guard. He's an ideal backup point guard or, like a low end fifth starter, and they probably need him to be more. So that's where I just feel a little bit more confident with other teams, especially having two very good players. So I believe two top 20 players in OTG's top 50 via you and Jack. I think, what do we got? Blake Griffin at 19 and Jimmy Butler at like 17, no, 16.
16, yes.
Yeah. So if you have two of those guys, that's going to be a game breaker. Maybe Aaron Gordon can get into the top 25. I'm not sure if that can happen. I don't know if his ceiling is that high, even though he's such a good two-way player. I just think offensively, he's never going to be your number one option. And that's what Butler and Blake Griffin provide you. And that's what Orlando kind of lacks at this point.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Any other thoughts on Orlando and expectations for this year? Could you see them make a splashy trade? Do you think that's a possibility? They have all their draft picks pretty much moving forward, and it's not like they have any huge trade assets other than Mo Bamba, but they do have some tradable contracts where they maybe wanted to make a smaller move to give them a pop.
I think there is some world where they may trade like Evan Fournier. We kind of heard some rumors in the past about it, but again, like if you're competing for a playoff spot, as of right now, you want to please the fan base, and I don't think you want to jeopardize a playoff appearance necessarily. But I think there's a chance they make a move. I wouldn't rule it. I'd probably say there's a 40% chance we see this team make a move.
Yeah, I can actually see them making a move to improve and trying to lock up a playoff spot. Kind of like we talked about, they kind of went all in with this core, re-signing Vucevic and Ross. So that kind of tells me, hey, we want to be in the playoffs. And if they look like, hey, we're dealing with an injury or maybe guys aren't performing how we would like, let's make a small move and add a possible starter or even just a bench piece to take us to that next level, even if it's just like a six-man score or a point guard that can score and Markelle Fultz isn't the guy at this point.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Orlando?
I'm interested. I have to be honest, which is weird to say about the Orlando Magic, but I am intrigued. A team with so many young guys, they have to catch your attention because, the Eastern Conference has the opportunity for, quite a few teams to make the playoffs, and Orlando is one of those bubble teams with a lot of young talent. And then again, Fultz. I think Fultz has been one of the more interesting players we've had in the league in the last couple of years because of all the stuff he's dealt with on and off the court. So seeing what he becomes definitely has my attention.
And this is just a random thought. I really wanted to see D'Angelo Russell on Orlando Magic. I thought he would be such a great fit with the pieces they have and give him that playmaker and score. It'd be interesting if they could swing some type of trade, maybe Vucevic going to Golden State or D'Angelo coming here. But as of right now, it looks like Russell stay with Golden State.
Not that this has anything to do with the Magic. No, never mind. I'm not gonna even touch that. Oh no, no. There is this is the Magic connection because we heard the rumor of D'Angelo Russell possibly for Andre Drummond talks. There could be some sort of desire for the Golden State Warriors to go after a center like Evan Fournier, who at least does have a competent three-point shot, which could fit into their system a little bit better if they wanted to address that issue and move D'Lo. So I would say there is some sort of logical reasoning between the connection.
And I also have, in the past, there was rumors for Aaron Gordon, D'Angelo swaps for the Nets and Magic, but I don't know if that would happen. Just throwing things out there, and obviously, we expect Orlando to have a fun season. But getting to League Pass, how would you rate them 1 through 10?
Now don't hate me, Orlando Magic. It's a 5.5. There is some intriguement, but again, this hasn't been a team to proven they're an offensive team that can score points. So there's a lot of defense with some really sad, boring droughts of very little offense. I think there is intriguement for these young guys to pop up, which I've said about 47 times in this pod. There is potential for Markelle Fultz to really become the number one overall pick that we all were hoping he would be coming out of Washington. So I think there's chance of them being higher of the league pass rating team. I think going into the season they're like a 5.5 because I'm not so sure yet we're gonna see offense that makes me wanting to watch them on a nightly basis.
Honestly, yeah, I'm at a 5, and if they had a good point guard, they'd probably be all the way up to 8. And that's no disrespect to DJ Augustine, who I feel like I'm throwing mad shade at this show. But if they just had an elite playmaker with some of the resources they have on the wing and Gordon Isaac and Vucevic down low, it would just be oops galore. Like there would just be a lot of great transition play here. I just randomly thought of this. I know we're in League Pass. Do you think this is a team that can make a move for Chris Paul?
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely actually. But you would have to part with one of your younger players. So whether that's
Would you though? I think that or OKC will be happy to get off that contract if you could just offer them cap relief.
But who would you would have to send someone in return in cap situation wise that's got to be Terrence Ross or Vucevic, no?
You could probably get away with sending Fournier, Aminu, DJ Augustine would meet the
Okay.
numbers.
Okay. I mean, yeah, actually, I don't think that's terrible. Because
Or you throw Markelle Fultz in and he's not working out. Maybe OKC wants to take a swing at him and he's the guy you throw in there, and then you're throwing in Fournier, Fultz, and Aminu.
Okay, yeah, so there is some traction I could see on this. Because if you are a borderline playoff team or you think you can be, maybe best case scenario, this team's hitting the ground running, right? And they can maybe be a home court team in the Eastern Conference, but they're a one really good player away and a point guard away and a guy like Chris Paul, then yeah, there is definitely some traction to being able to trade a guy like Augustine and Fournier to get a top flight point guard in Chris Paul. That'd be interesting. I wouldn't hate seeing Chris Paul in Orlando. I don't know how he'd feel about it, but I wouldn't hate it myself.
I think he'd be happy to be in the playoffs. Like
True.
there's a really, I mean, how good would the Magic be if, let's say, they maintained keeping Vucevic, Gordon, Terrence Ross, and Isaac, and then they added Chris Paul?
The playmaking would be what you would see dramatically change. Having a guy like Chris Paul who can probably get even more out of Vucevic. Like, think about this. Vucevic has had a lot of success with, again, DJ Augustine slander, you know, slightly above average point guard play. You get a guy like Chris Paul who is one of the best in pick and roll situations. Vucevic may have like a career year with a guy like Chris Paul.
Yeah, it would be really intriguing. I'm actually like surprised people haven't talked about it a little bit more. Obviously, Orlando's not known for making those flashy types of moves, but it could help change the perspective of the franchise. And I don't know, that seems like a second round playoff team if they add Chris Paul.
And
I mean, it's
I think
speculation, and we don't know what the rest of the roster would look like, but it feels like it would be a very improved team.
Yeah, I think I've said this on a different pod, but like even Kyle Lowry,
Yeah,
I think he's another guy who fits in, especially if this team wants to keep their their defensive identity. A guy like Kyle Lowry just slides right into that mold, gives them a little bit more offense, a veteran leadership, obviously the experience of winning an NBA title on the roster as well, which I think pays dividends, and then being the defender he is. That would be also a guy who makes sense because obviously him signing that extension, I think that makes it even more likely that we see Kyle Lowry traded this season.
yeah, and I think that would actually work out for Orlando. Like you have 2 years with him, it goes well. Help these young guys take a step. Maybe Markelle Fultz can turn into the player you want him to be. Obviously, with Lowry, you're going to probably have to give up assets. Or Chris Paul, you're getting at a cheap price. But I would keep an eye on Orlando for improving that point guard position, and even just a guard in general. Like Bradley Beal would make a lot of sense here, but I don't think they have the assets to get Bradley Beal unless they're willing to part with Bamba and an array of draft picks.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
And you don't necessarily want to trade your star within your division, even though, the Wizards aren't going to be competing, but he'll just come back and kill you for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So, but Orlando is a low-key playoff team that I'm watching, a low-key trade playoff team that I'm watching. Now, what TV show comparison would you give them?
I picked one of your shows. Don't hate me. Burn Notice.
Damn, I hate you. That's a good-ass show.
uh,
I'll just say this. I respect any show that can maintain a single episode plot while also maintaining a season plot at the same time. They're the shows that I enjoy the most because there's like an underlying plot that carries on throughout the entire season, but there's also a show-to-show plot.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's a rare category. Like The Office is another show I think kind of fits that mold where you put on any episode, you can watch it, but at the same time, there's a season story going on as well. Maybe not as in depth as Burn Notice. But yeah, no, those shows definitely are a little bit more enjoyable. But again, Burn Notice is a show, which oh man, it's crazy. It hasn't been on air probably for like what 5 years now.
That was probably like one of the first TV shows I like actually got into and was like, okay, I actually need to watch every episode.
Yeah. No, it was the Team USA show, and I definitely enjoyed Burn Notice. If you don't know Burn Notice, it's basically a spy gets burned, and then he's got some friends, and they just do shit. It's pretty enjoyable. And I think this team is enjoyable. There are some faces, there are some characters in which you want to watch, you want to see what they got going on, and it's a solid watching show.
100%. I thoroughly enjoy it and would definitely compare it to a better team. No disrespect. I went with
Yeah,
Bob's
we're
Burger.
slim pickings here, man. We're slim pickings.
Bob's Burgers, which is maybe a controversial pick. I'm not a huge Bob's Burgers guy. Like I think it's funny sometimes, but it's not a show I go out of my way to watch. And I'm not really, no disrespect to the Magic, I'm not going to go out of my way to watch all the Magic games this season.
I don't feel bad anymore, Nick. You picked Bob's Burger for the Orlando Magic. See, I no longer feel bad because we both disrespected each other on this podcast.
I mean, in the adult TV show world, like animation wise, just Bob's Burgers doesn't make it into my top five. I think it's a good show, but it's not better than the rest. But that's for a whole nother podcast, maybe off the glass of the movies. As always, a pleasure, Kory. You can find the NBA Outlet on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube.
Peace out, knuckleheads.